3, 2, 1. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The VUU, the talk show of the Church of the Larger Fellowship. I'm Chris Rivera, and I'm so excited to be with you all today after our holiday break from last week. So you'll notice if you're watching us live or taking a view of us a little bit later, that we don't have guests this week. And we just, we're trying to live into this pandemic/fascist uprising moment, and sometimes the roundup of guests is just not possible. So today you are going to get a little insight into what the CLF is up to. We're going to do our UU roundup, and you will be blessed with the ministry of Quiana and Dawn and myself. So we're going to go right into our personal check-ins, and I'll just let you know that it is a gorgeous fall day. I guess really I have to stop saying fall. I'm not sure exactly when I have to do that. I guess at midsummer, but or at midwinter. But it is so beautiful, and it's cold but not ridiculous. And I'm just really thankful for that here in Augusta County, Virginia. So I'll send it over to you, Quiana. How you doing?
I am well. I'm here in Ann Arbor, and it is a beautiful day. Like you said, there's a breeze, but it's 30, but I'm hardy, so it doesn't matter to me. But I have not pulled out my winter jacket, and it's December 3rd. So that for me feels like a win. Definitely going to go take a walk after this because sunshine days are few and far between in the Midwest, So I'm taking advantage of that and just living my best life. A lot going on, but all good stuff. And I'm excited to be here with you and Don. And I'm excited to lean into something you said, Chris, which is important to me, is this is fun. And yet it's really hard and behind the scenes a little bit sometimes. Everybody's not available. Everybody doesn't have time. Everybody might want to talk about their thing A, but you're like, we want to talk about thing B. So really just leaning into being present today, much more than being a force and moving energy. Just today is about being still and being present, and that community happens sometimes in the stillness as well as the movement. And with that, I will turn the floor over to my friend Dawn.
Thank you. Good morning, middle of the day. And I am here in fantastic South Jersey, just 15 minutes out of Atlantic City, down in the place they call the Pinelands, which is a actual magnificent little natural resource of pine barrens down here. It is kind of cloudy, kind of sunny. It's one of the it's like a Thanksgiving, late November, early December kind of day. It's you don't want to go out without a sweater or a sweatshirt or something, but if you keep moving, you're pretty warm. Yeah, it's one of those. And yeah, just echoing what Quiana said, it's from the ministers I'm talking to, we are all just a little bit busy. Everybody's got a lot going on. The pandemic is keeping everyone busy doing things we're not accustomed to doing, which takes extra time and extra energy. And COVID brain is real. Like my brain is just not able to retain stuff. Not that it was ever really good at it, but but this has just made it a little embarrassing. But we're here. It's it's a good day. I'm above ground and able to set up and take nourishment. I'll take it. And I will hand it over to Tanner, who is the wizard behind the curtain.
And I'll just mention that some of our friends who have had COVID have asked that we call it pandemic brain. Okay. If we haven't had COVID, because the COVID brain thing is a real, not the pandemic brain isn't real. Pandemic brain is real, but the COVID brain is a whole different experience. So we're trying to shift. That's something that Aisha and I in particular are trying to do, because we were the ones a lot of the time calling it COVID brain as well. So that's pandemic what we're brain. Trying to do. So over to you, Tanner.
Good morning. I'm Tanner. I'm in Southern California, where it is unexpectedly chilly and windy this morning. Chilly like 58 degrees, which I know is not chilly for a lot of places, but for us it is. I will be moving your comments from YouTube over into Zoom so our hosts can see them. So please comment. And if you have any technical issues or anything, as well, comment in the YouTube chat, and I'm over there to help you with it. And I'll pass it back to Christina.
Well, I wanted to open it up for our usual UU roundup. And I think, Don, you were saying that a bunch of people are doing a thing.
Yeah, this is the week at the end, one of the weeks in the course of the year that the Ministerial Fellowship Committee is meeting. Normally they would be, meeting in person in Boston and complaining about the weather and the traffic and that kind of thing. But this is the time when people who are ministers in formation have what is the UU equivalent of almost your oral exams, your oral defense. And it's a remarkable process. It is imperfect and perfect, and it is a thing that all UU ministers have to go through if we want to be in fellowship. And so there are a bunch of people who are going to be seeing the MFC, where they will have 45 minutes to convince a panel of mostly strangers that they ought to be welcomed into fellowship as ministers. And I want to say there are 2 or 3 panels that see people, and each of them sees maybe 8 to 10 candidates. So it's a long week for the committee, and it's a stressful time for the candidates. So, but by Saturday at noon, we will have a fresh new batch of newly fellowshipped, welcomed into preliminary fellowship ministers, and some very exhausted servants to our movement. So that's where Michael Tino is too. Michael is on the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, and so we are thinking kind thoughts and sending warm thoughts in that general direction.
Absolutely. And I'll give a shout out. We always give a shout out for our own CLF staff folks who are going to the MFC, and Eli and Antonia Beldegato and Eli Schneider are going to the MFC this week. So we are sending all of our prayers and best hopes with everybody going to the MFC, but particularly Antonia and Eli, because they're ours. And they have been working so hard. And we just, we appreciate everything that they're doing on behalf of their CLF ministry. So lots of love to all of them. Thank you to all of the folks that volunteer for the MFC. The MFC is a volunteer organization. We have a couple of UUA staff members on that. But the vast majority of the folks that are doing the MFC work are doing it as volunteers. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'll also mention that's making it extra, because we don't mean, the MFC process, the fellowship process to be any extra, but why not? They're doing this virtually. And so the MFC used to be in Boston, and people would get to go to Boston and, stay overnight and, have some wind up time and wind down time with a mentor if they wanted. It was a very personable process, and that's harder to do on Zoom. It's really hard to do on Zoom, and so it just kind of adds an extra level of difficulty, and it also in some ways makes it more accessible. So there's trade-offs there. So I'm hoping that the MFC will take what they learned from doing it virtually and be able to, meld that into their processes going forward. Maybe there's a hybrid model that they can come up with that would be a little bit, more.
I used to think that one of the very few perks of being on the MFC was that occasionally you got to go to Boston and stay in a relatively nice sort of inn. And now you still have to do all the work and you don't get the trip to Boston.
Yep.
You don't get the good seafood and the salt air if you're from somewhere where you don't have that. So now they just have all the work and they get to stare at a screen instead of hanging out with colleagues and being able to connect.
It's so true. Janine Gelsinger was asking, would love to hear the hosts' thoughts on this process, on the MFC process. Janine is just taking us there.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah.
My view is really interesting on this one because I'm on a path to ministry. I am ministering with people. I don't know if I want to be a UU minister because I'm not sure about the process. And I don't know what happens after the process. I don't know what community will fully support and hold me as a queer Black, unapologetically Black liberation theologist minister. And I don't think as a collective denomination have done the work that it will take to support me in a church setting. And what do you guys call it? You guys have a word for it. Now I say
congregational ministry.
Yes, congregational ministry, but I mean
parish ministry.
Thank you, parish ministry. And so we just haven't created enough structure yet, and we haven't eliminated, addressed, dismantled, defunded, whatever word you like, around white privilege within our denomination. I don't think to support someone like me. I don't think that's happened yet. So I have to look at I don't look at the MFC process. I look at our denomination. So for me, I'm not looking at the going into the room in Boston. I'm like, what does this wider denomination have to offer me and support me? Not offer and support. It's a two-way street. It's not singular. And so I have a lot of questions that step way back to even before you even get to that room in Boston, right? And that perspective is different as a person who is honoring the call to ministry. I've heard it for a long time and I ignored it. And finally, at the age I'm at, 40 plus years old, I'm leaning into it and hearing it. And what does it mean, as Don was saying, to take on that debt, to take on those responsibilities, to lean into the structures we currently have when I don't feel like they're going to hold me. So I tiptoe into ministry. I tiptoe into the educational piece around school. I really look at what could the future be, and what if I invented a whole new way, not to be accredited, but to, anyway, y'all don't want to get in my head. I was going to say, I start dreaming really big about what are the pathways and how can we expand the pathways, right? And what does it look like for me, for somebody who, innovative programming is my jam. So all of these things, I cut myself off. Self-sensory, it's a new thing. So I'll just stop talking and let other folks speak.
Chris, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I have all those same questions, but I think I've answered a lot of them for myself over the years. So I started the path, I started ministerial formation, started at Meadville, and unfortunately my husband became ill and I had to attend to family. And so I had to find out how I could meet this calling, this very deep calling that I felt towards ministry in a different way. And I had paired starting Meadville with a half-time DRE position so that I could go to seminary, have a little bit of money coming in. And you know, it was really clear as I got further into religious education that was my path for ministerial formation. That there wasn't any doubt in my mind that this calling that I felt towards ministry could be fulfilled within faith formation and religious education. What I was going to have to be challenged with is the lack of recognition of that's ministry. That is ministry by a different name, and our faith denomination just has very little path for it. Like, you can become a minister you used to be able to become a minister of religious education, but that meant you had to do all of the same things as becoming a minister. You could just specialize. And if I'm not able to go to seminary, if there are institutional barriers to that part of coming, even like Quiana said, even coming to the MFC, even getting aspirant status, then that's not a path. Like, it's not a path if there's a barrier to it. It's just it's like a way that some people can go. And so I fought a really long time to have folks understand that there are other paths to ministry that we really need to support and embrace. And I've also felt like that is part of my calling to Unitarian Universalist ministry, is to show what you can do without being, what kind of ministry you can do without being a fellowshipped minister. And I think it's not lost on any of us that two of the three folks who are now heading up the lead ministry team at the Church of the Larger Fellowship are religious educators. That we haven't gone in front of the MFC. We've purposefully built our ministry around faith formation and religious education. And so for folks that don't know, that's Aisha and myself. And really tried to understand the ways in which we could push the edges of this envelope to really understand, because my part of this is I firmly believe that Unitarian Universalism is not going to be able to continue. It's not going to be healthy, and it's not going to be able to continue unless we come up with different paths to ministry. It is too closed. It is not going to be able to be the faith that we say we are if we do not have other paths to ministry. And we actually used to have a staff member at the UUA that was dedicated towards finding those. Teresa Cooley was the, I forgot what her title was, but something like Innovative Ministries Director. And there was actually somebody who was responsible for trying to figure out other ways of making this happen. And I'd like to see that kind of intentionality come back to the process.
Yeah. And I am aware, as the one person here today who has gone through that process, that I have all of the privileges that made that possible in a bunch of ways. But I will say that it has saddled me with a financial burden that is into the six figures range. That I had to make a decision when I like so many, I came to ministry kicking and screaming and trying to do anything else until I couldn't do anything else but do ministry. And so I got here as I entered the process as a self-employed, working under the table home improvement, home repair contractor. And I had a rusty old truck that was 20 years old and a bunch of tools. And then I was in a place that had a quad and ivy, and it was very, the class difference there. Like, I was more comfortable talking with the guy, like putting the air conditioners in, you know? And so that was a challenge. And throughout the process, when I would say to whoever was in power at whatever juncture I was in, this is really hard for people who are not affluent. And they would say, well, we want to make sure that you're invested in the process. And I was just like, to the tune of $100,000, you know, so that I can get a job as a minister, so that I can, you know that my federal student loan stuff will go away when I die. Excellent, right? Like, no, that's nuts. And so much of it costs so much. And I had to decide if I was going to either, the way to get through it is either to be independently wealthy, to work 3 jobs and spend 10 years getting through the process, or to be willing to take on that kind of debt. And so I decided to take on that kind of debt, to go through this process and become a parish minister. And these are what we're talking about. These are all sort of cultural issues within Unitarian Universalism and the overall arching process toward being an ordained minister. And Quiana just brought up that, oh, I'm sorry, I'll let you talk about that. You want to talk about that? Go ahead. About not all ministry is in the parish.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess I was just starting to think a little bit about calling versus ministry versus minister. Those are all 3 different concepts that have something overlap, and sometimes they don't. I think it's a really personal and really intimate thing. I know for me, I have a calling to be in community and be a community connector. It has taken the form of ministry, which means for me that I'm active in Blue, that I'm creating innovative ministry as appropriate, and that I'm constantly thinking of ways to, how can we expand that and add a faith component? How can we turn that into something bigger and better? How can we tie that into something we know is going to happen? I'm always got my hands kind of going. And shout out to Jenikis Jinkles. I don't know, wait, how do you say his name from Jingle Jangle? Oh gosh, I messed up my own joke. That's how funny, laugh now, it might not come again. So the whole point is I'm always thinking, and that is my ministry. My ministry is to be in community. Like, so for example, I'm not a street person. By that I mean, if y'all gonna go have a rally, I'm gonna be here when you get back. I'm not really good in the street. I'm not gonna be your girl who walks 12 miles with you at the protest. I will drop off some bottled water and some sandwiches. I will be here when you get home. I'll rub your feet. I'm not a street soldier. I'm okay with that. Everybody has to find their lane and do what they're really good at. And my ministry is being a healing space and a balm for people after they've been out in the streets and the struggle. The work that I do with Blue is very explicitly, oh, we're out here doing George Floyd, let's have Juneteenth. Oh my gosh, there's all these kids who didn't get to experience stuff. Let's have a graduation. What are the things that can bring us comfort? What's the butter on the toast, right? I keep thinking I'm hungry. So what's the butter on the toast? What can we make it just more luscious? That's my ministry. I am not a minister. There is no REV in front of my name. Many folks perceive me as a faith or religious person, and I respect that, and I lean into that, and I get excited about that. Do I need the validation of having an REV in front of my name? Sometimes I want that because I'm a human and I get a little bit of ego up in here. Hey, ego, how you doing? But ego's a visitor. Ego's not a permanent resident, right? It's a tourist. Like, you can be a tourist ego, but let's bring it back to earth. And I don't want to take that title away from the folks who have earned it, who've gone through the process, for whom that title is what is fire for them. And so it's complicated. But I don't want to mistake, and the reason I brought this up, y'all, I'm sorry. The reason I brought this up is to say that if you have a calling, if you know what your passion and your power and what moves you, step into your calling, regardless of what anyone says. You're always able to answer your calling in some way. If you know you want to be a chef, but your daddy and them ain't going to pay for chef school, find a way to start cooking for your friends. Find a way to keep your passion and your calling going. Okay, you can't be a fashion designer, but it's Halloween and it's cosplay con time. Call your friends and be like, let me make you this outfit. Let me do this thing. If that's your calling, it's going to come out of your pores. As much as I didn't want to say I was doing ministry, it was coming out of my pores. It was coming out of my mouth. And everyone literally around me was like, you don't see that? You don't hear that? You don't smell that? I was like, what are you talking about? And no clue. And everyone was like, they didn't know if I was playing, and I wasn't, right? Are you being funny? And I'm like, what are you talking about? So the point is, find your calling, answer it in the ways that you can answer it. If that involves ministry, if that involves you engaging people in your passion and moving that word forward, do that. If you never become a minister, REV, you are still beautiful and valid, and the work you do still has a place. Now, and that's what I know. That's what I know for sure. I will always answer my calling, and I will always do ministry. I don't know if I'll ever be a minister.
And I think one of the things that, as Unitarian Universalists, that we need to explore more is our own ordination culture and history and theology. So one of the things that people really don't understand is the MFC process is a process for fellowship of ministers. It is not necessarily an ordination process, right? The ordination in Unitarian Universalism comes from the congregation. That's why we have congregations that ordain, a minister, and generally, the congregation that you come out of is the one that ordains you. And that comes back to our theology of that when there is someone who is recognized in your community as doing ministry, as ministering to people, the community's responsibility is to support that person into that vocation. And so what is supposed to happen is those communities, those congregations should be supporting those folks into that ordination. So they should, in my opinion, be paying for that seminary. They should be paying for the MFC process. They should be supporting that person through that journey so that that person can then serve Unitarian Universalism in many different areas. So I think that we kind of have it backwards almost right now. We have this almost consumeristic mentality of a minister, takes on all this debt and does all this stuff and then goes and ministers Unitarian Universalism in these communities. And I'm like, once I started studying this, I was like, oh, no. Those congregations are supposed to be uplifting and upholding and holding those folks who are ordained accountable for that ordination, and hold them accountable for that ministry, and hold them accountable for their actions. And we've kind of turned it upside down and inside out. And I would really love if we could relook at our process from where where our intention was in the beginning. And it doesn't mean that it's always right. The beginnings don't always mean that we were doing the right thing. But I think in this case, there was something to the idea that community is responsible. And that's why we still have these vestiges of that. And I look at congregations that have taken what we call, quote unquote, the courageous step to ordain folks within their congregation who haven't gone through the MFC process, who haven't, gone through those steps, and have said that is a minister. We don't care if they had whatever institutional barriers that were in their way. That person has been doing ministry, and we are going to recognize it because that is our responsibility as a Unitarian Universalist congregation. And I know that there's issues with that. I'm not saying that's the end-all be-all answer, but what I'm saying is all of these things have to be part of the cooking, the soup that we're making. It can't just be this one ingredient that we're so attached to right now. It has to be that there are multiple paths into the recognition of religious professionals who are doing ministry. Because I do call myself a minister. I call myself clergy. I, collar up if I'm going out into the streets. Because I do feel that as my calling, and whether or not I've had a congregation recognize it now, I know that my God and my ancestors and my community have recognized it. And so I need to be able to be accountable to that, right? To be able to be accountable to those people who have said, yes, you are our minister, and we're going to hold you accountable for being our minister. And why the fuck am I not calling myself a minister? I'm not calling myself reverend because I do hold a very deep and special place for the ordination process in my heart. And I think that there's something beautiful and spiritual and transformative about the ordination process. So I do not call myself reverend, but I do call myself minister.
So
I think, go ahead, Don. I can hold mine.
Okay. There's a couple of things at play here. One of which, and like anybody who's been through seminary, we spend what I considered a really extreme amount of time talking about the Cambridge platform. And the Cambridge platform was this thing that was developed in the 1630s that was this covenant among congregations here in North America to rule how they were going to be in community with each other. And it was established in response largely to the Church of England, where the colonizers had come from. And it included within those threads was a great big dose of you're not the boss of me, right? Nobody can impose upon us a minister, right? Which is what the Episcopal structure in England was doing. And so that's where we got the language of congregations could ordain, and that's where at our service of the living tradition, right, where people are brought into preliminary fellowship, where they're recognized for that. The language there is, we call from among you. Okay, we call from among you these people, and then we're all named and we all march up and sit in uncomfortable chairs. So there's that. That was created at a time when somebody would be coming up in a congregation and having a call to ministry and having something of an aptitude, and that person would be supported by the congregation with the understanding that that person would then serve that congregation until they die, right? So the congregation was willing to invest in that person's education because they knew that they would get 50 years worth of service from that ministry, because that was transactional. Whether or not we want to acknowledge that, that's part of what that was. And so one of the reasons for the Cambridge platform was because for the first time ever, really, people were mobile. People would move from one town to another. And in order to be a member of a church, there were a bunch of rules. But if you were a member here and you went to this new church, one of the key provisions of the Cambridge platform was membership was transferable. So you didn't have to get saved again when you went to the new place, right? Because there were rules about you to be a member. You had to have this kind of spiritual experience, and you had to testify in front of people, and they had to witness that you were a changed person and that you had been saved or been blessed or whatever the language was that they were using. And so membership was then transferable, which was new. And as people became more mobile, that one-on-one relationship between ordained minister and congregation that lasted a lifetime, for good, bad, or otherwise, started to stretch and be moved in different ways. So as people began to move around, so did ministers begin to move around. Okay? And the congregation is still the ordaining body. The congregation does not require anything in particular to ordain somebody into ministry. They have the freedom and the power to do that of their own authority. Our Universalist roots with Hosea Ballou was ordained at a conference of Universalists. He was a self-educated minister coming out of the Baptist tradition in New Hampshire. And he was a tree stump preacher all around New England. And his ordination happened at a convention where the leader of the convention strode up to him on the stage, clasped a Bible to his chest, and said, "Go out and I ordain you to go out and preach the good news."
Wow.
That's how ordination happened at that time in Universalism. Okay, that's how Hosea Ballou was ordained. So a congregation can ordain Quiana, or they can ordain Christina. The problem now is how Unitarian Universalist structure behaves. So in order to go into ministerial search, right, which is like Match.com meets the NFL draft, sort of bizarre. In order to access the search process, you have to be in fellowship. Okay. In order to, right now you're seeing it, right? In order to access the search process, you have to be in fellowship as a Unitarian Universalist minister. To be in fellowship, you have to go through the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, which is, I explain it like kind of like the Girl Scouts, right? You come in and you're a brownie, right? You're an aspirant, which means you've signed a piece of paper that said, I want to be a minister, and oh God, now what do I do, right? Okay, so then you're an aspirant, and then you pass some steps and you become a candidate, okay? Which means now you've got some real structure stuff you've got to do. You've got to get this kind of degree, and you've got to do at least 1 unit of clinical pastoral education, CPE, which is usually often a hospital chaplaincy or a nursing home chaplaincy or some sort of chaplaincy program. They always like to see you spend some time in religious education. They also require, before you can be a fellowship, they require an internship or an internship equivalency of 1 year full-time or 2 years half-time in a parish setting, or in whatever parish setting. Like there are some folks who have done, who understood that their ministry, their calling was to street ministry, and so they worked with an organization that did street chaplaincy. But there has to be a structure, because the UUA is a structure and it respects the authority of other structures. Okay, and so now you've got You filled out all the paperwork. They're really happy about paperwork. You've taken all the classes. You've got your MDiv. You become a candidate by achieving all of these different steps, right? And then you submit a packet to the MFC in which you have to prove, you have to demonstrate, they like the word demonstrate, not prove, your competency.
All the tea. I love it, Don. Keep talking. I'm learning all the tea. All the tea.
All right. You have to demonstrate your competence in world religions, in Christianity, in Judaism, in pastoral care, in anti-racism, anti-oppression, in leadership, there's a bunch of them. There's like 8 or 9 competencies. And each one of these, you have to write an essay, and you have to show I've taken these classes and I've done this stuff, and you have to fit it all in one page because these poor folks on the MFC have to read a dozen of these 3 times a year, okay? And you have to include all of your transcripts from every time you went to college, and then all your time in grad school. And you have to prove, you have to have the psych eval, which in some places is a 2-day psychological evaluation, which you have to pay for. You have to pay for. They pay half, but you have to pay for, right? And it's like $2,000. And they tell you and they use the MMPI, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Indicator, which is an antiquated piece of psychological equipment that was developed on male prisoners who were in jail for violent crimes. Awesome, because they had a captive audience, therefore they could develop this tool. Oy, right? So there's so many things. It's like turning a battleship. It's like turning a battleship to change this process.
And that's just to get to preliminary fellowship.
And then so you file your packet, which some of them can be 150, 200 pages long, right? If you've had another career before pursuing Unitarian Universalist ministry, if you were a lawyer, you've got your undergrad, you've got law school, you've got your experience as a lawyer at wherever that was, like all of that stuff, and then you have to have all of those transcripts, right? So imagine that. Like, and I was a bit of a screw up in undergrad, so it took me 10 years to get through undergrad, right? So, and my grades were just all over the place because I was young.
So John, tell us how you get to full fellowship.
Oh, full fellowship. So
that just gets you, what Don is describing just gets you to preliminary.
No,
fellowship.
That gets you to your interview.
Yes, that gets you to your interview.
Preliminary fellowship.
For a preliminary fellowship.
Right, in which you go stand before, or when you do it in person, you are in a room before this group of people who have all read your packet. They've read your psych eval, they've seen your transcript for when you were a drunken 18-year-old college freshman, like all of that stuff, right? And your evaluations from your supervisors, all of it. And then you go in and you preach to them for 10 minutes, not 9 minutes, not 11 minutes, 10 minutes. Then you sit down, or then I'm using ableist language. Then you, when you're done preaching, you have a conversation with them where they ask you questions. And they ask you questions about church history. They can ask you questions about polity. They can ask you questions about your psych eval. They can ask you questions about who's your favorite theologian and why. And you have about a half hour to 40 minutes to dump all of that stuff out in what you hope is an appropriate level of whatever, right? Plus they're watching you to see how calm you are. Are you a ministerial presence? Okay. Then you leave the room. They confer, and they can take anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour or 2 hours. They invite you back in the room, and they tell you whether you have been welcomed into preliminary fellowship or whether you have to jump through some more hoops. They have levels of 1 through 5. 1 is, congratulations, you're approved for fellowship, you can go into search. 2 is, you got almost all of it, you got to finish this one thing, and then you're good to go. You don't have to come back. 3 is, we've got some issues. We see a minister event possibly, but we want you to, do another internship or have this other experience or take a year to think about this, and then come back in a year and we'll do this again. 4 is, we appreciate your passion, but do you think there might be some other way that you can serve the denomination? And 5 is, how did you get here? The police will see you out. It's not quite that bad. But what they say is, I'm sorry, we just don't see a minister here. We see no path to ordination for you. And you can't reapply. You can't reapply. I'm sorry.
John, so we're seeing a lot of, one, I want to thank you because I've had folks talk about that experience, but not as drawn out as you've just offered it. And I appreciate it. We've had a lot of comments in the comments to basically about barriers and about the removal of barriers. And I think, I never wanted Don to stop talking. And yet,
can somebody write that down? I want somebody to because that has never been said to me before. Thank you, Quiana. Thank you.
Yeah, that is, and even though I agree in a lot of ways, I know we still have 12 minutes left, so I want to make sure we just come back around and let you breathe, take a sip of coffee or tea. So thank you for explaining that. But also, I think we have this opportunity not to change the process, but to be expansive in the process. To say, here's community ministry, here's street ministry, here's if you were ordained in a different faith because you didn't know UU existed, but now you know and you want to tap into all of that history. Like, we have to have more than one way to be successful. If we are relying on that one singular method to define success or to prove our worth, it's always going to be awkward. You know what I mean? Like, we have
to have multiple paths because if we don't, what we are going to continue to get is what we have. And we are saying that we want something different. We are saying we want folks in ministry who have different lenses, who have different lived experiences. We are saying that in order to be the Unitarian Universalism of liberatory faith, we need a different type of ministry, but we keep having the same process to get there. We're like, wait a second. And again, it's not a knock on the folks that have gone through it. And I deeply respect that.
You wonder why we're grumpy?
we need more. We need more than that. I'm not saying that we don't need that. I'm saying that we need more than that.
So here's
a different process.
Here's the thing. Until recently, there wasn't really a path to ordination for community ministers. The MFC has only recently found a way to make that happen. And I know plenty of community ministers who are like, I don't need their approval to do what I'm doing, because community ministers don't generally go through the search process anyway. But in order to get access to the search process, you have to go through all of these steps and become a Girl Scout or whatever. You have to get your sash and get all the medals and stuff. And only recently has the UUA required proficiency in sexual ethics and professional boundaries. And we are the only denomination in America that does.
So I wanted to speak to something really fast. You guys have both used the word authority, and I think it's so important. Who has the authority and coincidentally the accountability process and the accountability components to name you who you are, to call you into the work that you do. And if you allow, because it's an allowance, right? You're allowing the MFC, you're allowing the UUA to decide if they are going to be the authority who confers this title upon you. It's a mutual, it's a relationship. You're not, I don't mean to say this to sound crass. Nobody's a victim or a villain, right? Like you tap in, like you're like, yes, this is a process I'm willing to go through. And they say, all right, we're willing to take you through it. And I don't mean that in the pejorative. I mean it very much. And you all are in a relationship, right? Like consensual relationship, no other qualifiers, right?
But consensual, but I will say it's an incredibly unbalanced power relationship.
Now we can speak to that now.
Right? Like I voluntarily signed on. And when you, in part of that original paperwork, you say that you will not accept ordination from a congregation until you have received preliminary fellowship.
Yep.
So you opt out of that workaround. Okay? Because sometimes partway through, you're like, wait a minute, they can ordain me? I'm out of here. But then you can't get into the search process.
Well, you can't get into the formal search process.
Right.
So there are, Aisha and I are living proof that there are other ways for congregations to find their ministers. And that part of this vicious circle is the way it's all tied up together. And I think part of it is that accountability, Quiana, and that authority that you're talking about is the idea that a congregation gets quote unquote a minister from the UUA search process, and in some way that is going to mean that the person who comes to be their minister, their ordained clergy person, is going to do no wrong, is going to do no harm, and because they've been through all of this process, and we know that's just not true. Like we know that is just not true.
We've been through the process. That doesn't mean we won't screw up.
Right. Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We just know that has never in the history of our current process, that has never meant that the person is going to do no harm, let alone do good ministry. Like, come on. So I think it gets back to, Quiana, that question of accountability and authority, and who are we holding ourselves as ministers accountable to, and who has the authority to make sure that we're being held accountable, right?
Right. Yeah. When what you just described, Don, doesn't have any appeal to me. No part of my body was like leaning in. I was leaning in like, are you for reals?
And let me tell you, that
like I've taken the MMPI more times than I care to tell anybody, but that's personal. And again, I don't believe in that. I have questions about that. So like, there's all these setups. Like, what? I'll keep my $60,000 of debt over here.
So what I can tell you is the UU Church Congregation Church Fellowship, whatever it is, of Ann Arbor, can ordain you as a minister without the fellowship process. You can get there. They believe in you. They love you. They believe in your ministry. They can ordain you. Okay? They can. They have that authority. The UUA doesn't always tell people that, because then they're afraid people will be ordaining folks all over the place. And there are some congregations where the systems are kind of screwed up, and you're like, I'm not sure I want that group endorsing anybody, right? But the truth is, if your congregation believes in what you do and wants to honor you with a title, they have the individual congregational polity. They have the authority to do that, and nobody can stop them.
Yeah. Leah Derlin-Jones at the congregation in Charlottesville has been their religious educator for over 27 years. When I got there, I think she was in her 23rd year or 22nd year. And I was like, and she wants to be a minister. And that's the other thing. Like, some people don't want to be, so that's fine. But she wanted a recognition of the ministry that she's been doing for a quarter of a century. And it wasn't until I left and in my parting words to the congregation said, this person has been your minister for over 25 years. Recognize it, recognize her. She has been with you longer than any ordained clergy person has been with you. I mean, there's been like 8 ministers in the time she's been your religious educator. And God bless that congregation. They were like, yeah, of course. And within a year, they ordained her just this past spring. And it is a beautiful thing because they came to, they had cottage meetings about it and what would it mean, and had all the questions answered and all of that kind of thing. But it was just such a beautiful coming together of the recognition of that which already existed. To me, that's what I'm saying to congregations, is recognize that which already exists, so that those folks can go on and serve not just you, but serve Unitarian Universalism. Tanner tells us we have 3 minutes left, and I have to give a plug for something. So if you all have any last moment, last thoughts about the MMC process.
We'll see you all really soon, and then I'll let Chris talk.
Next week, we are going to have Meg Riley and Charles Dumont, who are the new co-moderators of the UUA Board of Trustees, telling us about all the new ways in which governance is going. But before next week, on Monday, we have the kickoff of our CLF Connects events. So all through December, CLF staff members are going to be doing virtual events where you can come in and connect with us and just see us at our best. So as a teaser for next week's, one of next week's CLF Connects events, my friend Julica Hermann DelaFuente does fabulous cakes. Like, if you all have not seen the cakes that she does, they are just amazing. And I would just say baking challenged would be a nice word to use for me. I can make cupcakes.
I support you.
And so we are going to do our CLF version of Nailed It. Julica has made this gorgeous chalice cake that is just so beautiful. That I think that's cantaloupe for the flames. I'm not sure, but if you'll just see that thing, it is so beautiful.
Wow.
And myself and a couple of other contestants are going to attempt to make this in our own home kitchens using nothing but what we have on hand. We can buy ingredients, but we cannot buy any materials or new baking pans or anything like that. We will be attempting to recreate this, and Julica will be online with us as we do that. So, yes, Dawn, you should laugh because this is just going to be a treat for everybody. So join us. That is just one of the many. I think we've got about a dozen CLF Connect events in the next 3 weeks. So check out the CLF social media feeds. They'll be teasing out ones that you can join, ones that you can laugh at, ones that you can participate in. A huge hit last year was Tanner and Eli did a gingerbread house competition. But there'll also be ones that you can join. So on Monday, we're doing writing a holiday card to our incarcerated Unitarian Universalists. So you can drop in for 5-10 minutes, the full hour, whatever you want to do. I'll be there. And we're just going to be writing cards, holiday cards to incarcerated UUs. And just, bring a beverage, bring a piece of cake. I don't know, bring anything you want. And bring your dog, bring your cat. And it'll be a great time. So check into the CLF Connects events all through December. We'd love to see you there. And we'll see you on the VUU next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.